If you'll stand with me for a reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from the other, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer him, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?" Then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When I was young, my friends and I loved to play a pool game called Categories. In the simple game, everyone jumps into the pool and lines up on one side. The one person, the it person, jumps into the middle and swims over to the side to hold on. And with her back to the wall, the it person yells out a category. Ice cream, colors, horror movies, top 100 pop songs in 1998. And then she dips herself under the water for as long as she can hold her breath. Everyone else, rushing to speak before the it person surfaces, begins yelling out their thing. Mint chocolate chip, mauve, and so on. When the it person surfaces, she names everything she can think of in her chosen category. The goal of the game is, when she yells out your thing, to get to the other side of the pool without her noticing. If she notices you, she can tag you it. There are many strategies for this. Some of my friends relied on their speed, splashing merrily along without fear of getting caught. Others, like me, relied on stealth. We took a deep breath and then slipped carefully beneath the surface of the water and kicked off to swim along the bottom of the pool with a short plea to God that we make it to the other side before we have to surface. The last strategy, well, my brother was a category all his own. My big brother almost never swam to the other side because he'd pick the most ridiculous thing for whatever category the it person had declared. Ice cream, 1 scoop Superman, 2 scoops pistachios, and a half a scoop of Dutch chocolate. The Dutch is vital. Color, golden coral. Horror movie, Shriek If You Know What I Did Last Friday the 13th. Top pop song, okay, he probably sat that one out. The worst part was, somehow, when we shrieked at him that he was cheating, that he had to pick one thing and not a mix of things, he could logically regale us with why he made a perfectly legitimate choice. And if he couldn't get us to give in with that, usually he'd just yell, "I can't help it, none of you are as creative as I am." The poor tortured artist. It's human nature to create categories. Crafting paradigms, noticing generalities, grouping like items, our minds constantly struggle to organize the world around us. We craft boxes with definite boundaries and make lists of their characteristics so that we can prove to ourselves and everyone else what is factual, what is true, what works, and what doesn't. We make labels so that we can prove our understanding of everything. In grammar, so that you never end a sentence in a preposition. In history, so that you probably know no one sang their way through the French Revolution, no matter what Les Miserables leads you to believe. In literature, so you can tell the difference between a Shakespearean sonnet and those really weird books about vampires. And in science, so you know that Pluto is not a planet. Organizing information into categories can be helpful, but as with any human process, we should be mindful of the limits and even more mindful of the dangers. Because nothing makes this quirk of human nature more dangerous than when we apply our labeling techniques to human beings. When we try to assign characteristics of persons based on their economic standing, based on their biological sex, based on the color of their skin, their religious practices, the accent in their voice, or the prestige of their education. We may know in our heads that these groupings can't tell you everything about a person, but let's be honest, we do it anyway. We alienate the Republican or Democrat because we think that label tells us everything we need to know about their politics. We disparage the woman's anger as craziness or the man's tears as emasculating. We fear the Middle Eastern travelers as terrorists. We take a category, drop a person in it, and make that person his category. A man becomes his blackness. A woman becomes her biological sex. A teenager becomes his sexuality. We somehow have forgotten that such categorizations, they lead to Holocaust. Such categorizations lead to racial profiling in Arizona. Such categorizations lead to increasing violence against women. They affirm inequality in our educational system. They justify the hoarding of wealth. They promote bullying amongst our children. So forgive me if I find it strange that Matthew 25 uses such labels. On first look, it appears that all the quirks of every person, of every color, every gender, every sexuality, of every religion, all these quirks which makes each human being unique, are reduced to one of two categories. Those standing before the king must either be a sheep or a goat. And then the author lists those things which separate these people: who fed him, who gave him drink, who welcomed him, who gave him clothes over his nakedness, who nursed him in his sickness, who visited him in his chains. Perhaps, for many, this story offers hope. It gives us a neat and tidy list by which we can judge our behavior as followers of Christ. They seem like straightforward tasks. Easy enough to serve food at a homeless shelter and pass out bottles of water. Easy enough to say, "Oh, you're new to this church. Here, let me introduce you around." Easy enough to send clothes to the Goodwill, or to make a run to the hospital during lunch break, or to take a Bible with you to the local prison. But for those who find hope in this list, they must assume that they are sheep. We have forgotten that both the sheep and the goat seem equally surprised by the judgment bestowed upon them. Those deemed goats were not prepared for this horrific turn in the story: eternal fire and punishment. The story has unexpectedly become a violent text of terror. But if you consider yourself a sheep, and let's face it, probably most of us do, you remain untouched by this terror. But doesn't this seem a bit strange? A bit extreme, that because people did not tick off these particular chores on their list for the least, somehow they missed out entirely on eternal life. Doesn't it seem a bit radical to reduce the lives of human beings to the category of the damned on such short account? And for those who appear to earn eternal life based on having completed the same task, can the gift of eternal life really be based on such a trite scale? Or, by trying to figure out who is the sheep and who is the goat, perhaps we have missed the point entirely. Perhaps the author of Matthew intentionally uses such dangerous labels to try and tell us something else. After all, this is not the first passage of Matthew to create such strict categories. In fact, by chapter 25, Jesus has become quite good at drawing such one-dimensional characters. Good or bad, righteous or unrighteous, a sheep or a goat. And while we might identify with certain aspects of characters, if we take a moment to count our bad actions in with our good, who among us finds one character in Jesus' stories as representative of a whole human being? But if we can't put ourselves in one category or the other, how do we know if we're righteous? How do we know if we're accursed? To be fair, that we cannot identify with one character or the other is good news. Because if there's one constant in Jesus' stories, when a person assumes that she has the end, Jesus always takes that as his cue to say, you're definitely out. Comedian Christopher Moore makes a profound observation in his novel Lamb that depicts the life of Jesus. He describes the Sermon on the Mount as an exhaustive attempt on Jesus' part to teach his disciples about the kingdom of heaven. And after hours of teaching still clueless disciples, Moore's Jesus finally sits down in a huff. I can't teach these guys. They just don't get it. Patience drained, he mourns the intellectual failings of his chosen followers. Mary Magdalene rolls her eyes at Jesus' frustration, and with a smack on his arm, she launches into her rebuke. Faith isn't an act of intelligence. Faith is an act of imagination. Every time you give them a new metaphor about the kingdom, they see the metaphor. A mustard seed, a field, a garden, a vineyard. It's like pointing something out to a cat. The cat will always look at your finger and not at what you're pointing towards. If we read the story of Matthew 25 as a template to identify who's the sheep and who's the goat, we become the cat. If we try to measure how many times we visited Miss Edna in the hospital against how many times we walked past that homeless vet on the street corner, we become the cat. If we keep track of how many times we took a load from our closet to Goodwill in the past year, we become the cat. But maybe the text in its minimalism points beyond the sheep and the goats. The two simple categories, the two concise list of how to do justice, these do not describe the only steps to eternal life. They do not give us the minimal practices for justice. Instead, because Jesus makes it impossible to fit our faith within the boundaries of the text, the story gives us the space to expand beyond the text. Jesus challenges us not to a faith of list, but to a faith of imagination. And if this text challenges us to a faith of imagination, we as people of faith have the responsibility to ask bigger questions. We must ask, have we really fed the hungry when we buy our food from stores that don't pay its employees a living wage? Have we really given the thirsty drink as we continue to pollute water sources around the world? Have we really clothed the naked when we shop at stores that use sweatshops to produce their clothing? Have we really nursed the sick when we hoard health care among the wealthy? And have we really visited the prisoner when we support a punitive system over rehabilitating the individual? Matthew 25 may not be a text of terror about eternal punishment so much it is as a text of terror about the damage we inflict when we stick to our set list and labels. Too often we let our list and categories in biblical texts limit our faith. As Christians, we forego creativity by making notches in our post about how we fulfilled our duty. We forget our imaginations as we say we do good, but continue to submit to oppressive systems that cause the injustices to which we're responding. We like our labels. We really like our list. But we have the potential for so much more. We have this potential to build imaginative projects like the Jubilee movement, where an organization raises money to buy the debt off people facing bankruptcy. We can fight for the rights of the revolutionary Inside Out program, which takes college professors and their students into the prisons. And the college professor teaches the class to inmates and outside students alike. Because did you know one college course can reduce the likelihood of a return to prison by 40%? We can pay attention not only to the homeless vet on the street, but to where we might take him to lunch so that we're not paying to hurt other people. Because with a faith of imagination, we live beyond the confinements of a list of 6 practices. We live beyond the labels of the righteous and the unrighteous. And instead, we live creatively into the lives of one another, seeing the sheep and the goat inside each of us, and challenging one another to be the sheep, to be the people of an imaginative faith.